Hey, welcome back to the channel. Nick here, talking science of endurance and everything sports science in general. Back on another live stream Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Melbourne time, answering your questions about the science of endurance and sports science, everything from training, programming, lab testing, field testing, whatever it might be. Get your questions in. Happy to answer them and get into another great discussion this week. So we'll give it a couple of minutes just to let a few people trickle in. As always, the full replay is up immediately after the live stream ends. So if you can't make these live streams, that's okay. But looking forward to getting into another set of questions. I've been going through and I'm going to do a bit of a rewind through all of the live streams, hopefully by the end of the week, and code them. You would have seen I did it on a couple where I've gone through and made some time codes. So if you go back and watch the replays, you're able to click through the little red bar across the bottom. You're able to click through to the question that was that you want to find. Also, you'll be able to see in the description of those. Once I've got the time to go back and do them, I'm going to try and get on top of it week on week now. Do it immediately after the replay goes up, but you'll be able to see the list of questions in there. So when you're going back to watch it, you can have a quick look through. If there's anything of interest there that you want to watch, go through, click straight to it. You'll be able to click the time codes. It'll take you straight to that question and cuts out all the bits and pieces in around it that maybe not be applicable. If there's a question about running and you're a cyclist and you might not want to jump in and watch all that stuff, whatever it may be. But then also sometimes when I'm trying to bring things up or show you examples, pull up some notes, pull up some diagrams, things like that, takes a bit of time. I can separate into part one, part two. So my thoughts on the question and then bring up that diagram once I found it. You can just kind of click through if there is a bit of a delay. Found this is a little bit easier for me time management wise to be able to, instead of cutting up replay videos. And also a few people have sort of suggested it as a little bit easier method so that as soon as it goes up and put those time codes in for you, and then we're good to go. So without anyone sort of without anything to further sort of add on that, we have a couple of new videos up on the channel. Hopefully you've enjoyed them so far. Did a video the other day, as I mentioned last week, 1500 VO2 max tests over the last 4 years. What have I learned? Great video, just summarizing the key findings, and it had some really good feedback so far. One of the more popular videos over this week anyway, that I put up there on Monday. And then yesterday, a great question I covered around the cycling efficiency side of things. So turning that chemical energy into mechanical. What are the components of cycling efficiency? What are the factors we can and can't manipulate? Really good one. I think definitely to check out for the cyclists out there, but also the triathletes, really important one to look at. Maybe touching a bit more in aerodynamics and things like that soon in the not too distant future, because particularly for the amateur cyclist, I think we often forget that we can get those 1% gains or those 2% gains, 5% gains, whatever it might be, in terms of cycling efficiency, changing our bike fit, changing the components on the bike. You don't necessarily have to go crazy and always get the top end stuff that the pros have, but you can change a few things. Like even changing crank length is going to make a difference, changing your bike fit, getting a bit more aero. It's not all necessarily about just getting as low and as small as you can, and flexibility is one that people talk about. It's not just about flexibility, it's about getting a nice comfortable position that is going to be allowing the air to flow over you nice and streamlined rather than sort of causing all the turbulent air. So just changing things a little bit to make you a little bit more economical, a little bit more efficient. What are some of the factors that lead into that? Really good video that I put up yesterday. So go check those ones out once we are done here tonight. Looking forward as always to getting into some of the questions. We've got first one in. Will, welcome to the live stream tonight. Looking forward to listening to tonight's proceedings. Now the box one, and we'll get straight into the questions. Perfect. We've got the first one in here. Now the box one, but how do you find time to prioritize training in your schedule, which already seems very busy? In terms of priority of training, it's really a case of I do have to mix up my weeks quite a little bit. I usually like to have a reasonably routine training week where I sort of know that my runs are going to be on Tuesday and Thursdays. I can then run along on the weekend. At the moment, what's been working is Tuesday, Thursdays are the days that I'm sort of taking out of work at the moment to do my uni work and my master's work. So I got a bit more time in those days to go out and get my sessions done. Trying to do gym Monday, Wednesdays. I'm sort of lucky that I'm not necessarily training for triathlon at the moment. So I'm not swimming and I'm not really cycling much. I'm riding definitely once, sometimes twice a week, which is pretty sort of manageable. So that second ride is only usually 45 to an hour. The other one I go out on the weekend on a Sunday when I go a bit more time. But trying to fit all of that in, it really comes down to what comes up week to week, and I might have to move things. So for example, this week wasn't able to get as much done Monday and felt a little bit sort of tired as well from Sunday. So I put my gym session on the Tuesday, went running Tuesday afternoon. Today took a day off, so then tomorrow I'm going to do a double as well and do my running intervals in the morning and then get into some longer bike stuff in the afternoon. Then go out and I'm going to have to run because I'm working on Saturday. I'm going to have to run on Friday as well now. So just shuffling things around and not necessarily being stuck in a routine of week to week, which is something that, like I mentioned, I like being week on week, similar patterns, and be able to do my runs on Tuesdays and Thursdays, gyms on Mondays and Fridays, things like that. But sometimes it doesn't always happen. So being able to be flexible with that and embracing that sometimes you may just not be able to go and train that day, things might be a bit compromised. That's okay. And moving forward past that is the only way to really sort of make sure you still get everything in. So first and foremost, I try and make sure I get it done before or after work. Occasionally, I'm quite lucky with obviously having the treadmill and the bike set up at work and being in the lab. If I do need to get a quick bike session or an interval session done on the treadmill, I can punch that out middle of the day, which is kind of lucky on my breaks in between testing appointments. But just looking at the calendar for this week, or the program for this week, already, Tuesday was a double day yesterday, nothing today, double day tomorrow, Friday, nothing on Sunday, nothing on Saturday, and then we'll ride on Sunday. So it can be difficult. I know a lot of people probably have slightly busier schedules than I do, or maybe don't have busier schedules. Lockdown and COVID and things like that have made a little bit different for everyone. Speaking to an athlete today who had a little bit harder time through COVID, but some athletes have thrived. They found it a little bit better. Always interested to hear sort of how everyone sort of adjusted their programs and things like that. But yeah, the main one for me is just making sure they get something done. But if I have to change things around, then being flexible with that and not being caught up on, and making sure that my training's not compromised by those changes is the easiest way to make sure I still get everything done that I need to. Looks like a few more joining us in the chat. Make sure, joining us on the stream now. I can see a few people watching, so make sure you do say hello over in the chat. Even if you just let me know who's here. Always good to know, because I can only see numbers. I can't actually see who is in and watching. And if you've got a question, chuck it over in the chat as well. Happy to answer it. Already kicked things off with a great question tonight. So if you did miss that one and you're jumping in now, replay is always up, but we're just talking about prioritizing training in a busy schedule, making sure we can get everything in the week and being flexible and making sure that we're not getting caught up on, well, I didn't get it done on a Monday, so I can't do it. It's like, well, just move things around the week and that's okay. If we absolutely have to miss a session, we have to miss a session. Great to see Aaron in the chat. You'll have a notice actually, and I might bring it up when I'm able to on my screen. It won't let me bring it up. It's still loading. My laptop's being just a little bit slow. Here we go. Thanks to a couple of members, Aaron and Jacob here. You notice their little badges next to their names in the chat. Jacob's got a little green badge there for joining up. Joined us last week as a member of the channel. So if you want to be a part of Team NJ Sports Science, head down below, hit the join button underneath this video tile here, and you'll be able to join up. Help support the channel above and beyond just subscribing and liking. Got some things in the works in terms of some other perks other than just some priority in the chat and the badges. Got a few little things I'm working on to help you guys and sort of give back to you as well. And you actually notice that Aaron's badge is a pink one there. So having been on, he I think is potentially one of our longest serving members, if not our longest serving member so far. As you get further and further through, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, etc., those badges change. So it's interesting to see what colours you're going to have and a little bit of a race to who can get to, I think it's the blue. The blue is going to be our last one. In terms of the longest serving badge. So whoever can get there first, there will definitely be something special coming your way when we do get there. But for now, really appreciate all the support on the channel and thanks for joining us again, guys. Really do appreciate it. So if you've got any questions, chuck them in the chat. Let me know what your thoughts were on the videos this week. I know, Jacob, I saw your comment on the 1500 VO2 max test one. Wasn't able to respond to it because I was just flicking through it before we jumped on here. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think about some of the things I guess I've learned? That's not obviously a complete list of everything I've learned by doing so many VO2 max tests and watching so many athletes do their testing, but it's sort of the 5 key things that I notice commonly and see all the time. There's a few other things that we see. It's kind of gotten to the point now I can pretty much predict most occasions. VO2 max tests kind of have a bit of a fun game with the sports science interns that we do have in the lab helping us out when they're doing their placement. We'll take blood lactate. It'll be coming up on the screen and sort of challenge them to think about what some of their data, some of the athletes' data might be looking like. Was this the last couple of stages might have been 2 millimole, then 2.1, 2.2. All right, what do we think the next stage is going to be? And we kind of have a guessing game. 9 times out of 10, I get it right, and I'm sort of bang on the exact blood lactate, which is pretty funny. So it's the type of thing I've learned quite a lot about what to predict in performance too. So majority of the time, based on like a 5K time trial, I can pretty closely tell where an athlete's going to finish the test as well, which gives me a little bit more flexibility to make sure the test isn't excessively long. We can refine it. Having then a look at the ins and outs and what their oxygen consumption is a little bit different story. It's hard to obviously predict. It's hard to know what mitochondrial content someone has, but knowing where they might get to in the test is obviously going to sort of impact and make a little bit of difference on how I go about things, and then also process some of their training information, bring it all together with the data. Definitely helps me then sort of map things out, particularly when we don't have access to testing. Was really useful. Having that knowledge and understanding of all that physiology and seeing all that physiology over that those few years helps me then go in and understand when we don't have lab testing. All right, I can do a field test and understand, okay, this is what the pattern would have looked like had I been able to put them through a lab test. So I can kind of get the same information, if not better information. Is sort of a really sort of useful, I guess, side product or byproduct of doing so many tests and seeing so many athletes go through it. So really grateful to be able to have done all of that. And hopefully my insight sort of helped a few of you as well if you have watched that video. So definitely I definitely recommend go checking that one out. Moving into our next question here. Great to have Aaron, one of our members, jump in and chuck his question. We've just come out of a heat wave here, and I was finding it difficult to keep my heart rate low enough for a zone 2. Would I be better off walking? So in brackets, a boring zone 1-ish feel. So like almost active recovery because the heart rate's coming up, I'm assuming. Doing a zone 2 ride. So we're obviously talking about running here primarily. Doing a zone 2 ride instead with heart rate is going to be a little bit easier to keep down, or if it does drift up, it's more in alignment with what your running heart rate might be. Or just missing these sessions. Really interesting one. It's the type of thing that, depending on where that exact zone 2 sits, and as long as it's accurate, it's then hard when you're estimating zone 2 and zone 1 and things like that. I hold by the fact that if you were running in hot conditions, you still want to be getting the most specific stimulus. So if we're a runner, we need to run. In which case, if it's really difficult to run at that low intensity, you pretty much at a walk. That's probably partially coming down to timing in the day, but then also partially just maybe a bit of built-up dehydration. Make sure checking in, if you have been going through, particularly in your region, if you've been going through a bit of a heat wave, multiple days of really hot. I know we're about to get this here in Melbourne next couple of days. I think Friday, Saturday, Sunday is going to be like 30 or 20, 27, 28 and 30 or something like that, and across the weekend into Monday. It's the type of thing, making sure you're on top of your hydration in the days leading into that, and then also through it, making sure you're hydrating adequately. That's one of the factors that'll keep the heart rate down even within the heat. So it might only rise a couple of beats per minute rather than rising sort of 7 to 10 beats per minute as a result of the heat. Timing of the day of the session's a really critical one. Making sure you try and get out and work around the coolest parts of the day where practical, because running is going to be better than going and doing a zone 2 bike session. Now I know it's going to be similar in terms of the type of ride, the type of intensity in terms of heart rate, things like that. But at the end of the day, if you're training to be a runner, we need to go out and run. So trying to keep that heart rate down, as much as it's a pain, if you try and do some of those things, stay hydrated and go to the coolest parts of the day, it's going to be a bit frustratingly slow, but you're better off doing that very, very slow jog than doing maybe a zone 2 ride. Alternatively, if it is that bad that you can't go out, maybe it is probably best to just miss the session. If it's 40 plus degrees in terms of Celsius, it's probably best to maybe just give that session a miss on that day and wait for a cooler opportunity. If it's the type of thing that there's not going to be a cooler opportunity for a couple of days because it's a sort of heat wave thing over a few days or part of the week, most of the week, they may be going and doing some riding just as a substitute. But keep in mind that even if that heart rate, that zone 2 heart rate equivalent on the run, if you're hitting that but you're riding, we're actually riding a tempo zone 3 ride rather than riding a zone 2, if that makes sense. So we're pushing then too hard. Yes, it's the same stimulus in terms of heart rate. For example, I probably confused everyone there, but if you're riding at 150 beats per minute, because you normally run at 150 beats, but your zone 2 heart rate on the bike is 140 or 145, well, you're actually now just riding tempo, so you're going to fatigue yourself more, and we're not actually getting the same effect as if we're riding at 140. It doesn't just cross over to, my running heart rate is that, so it's still the same, because there's more involved in terms of body movement. Your body isn't moving as much on the bike. So we're actually still overshooting. It's like you going and running at instead of 150, it's like you going and running at 155. It then just becomes a tempo. So we're not really changing anything. You would have to make sure you were dropping heart rate right down on the bike and making sure that was down, in which case, that's why I say you're better off just keeping to the different or the cooler part of the day, is going to keep you more in alignment with where you're looking, and just going through that frustratingly slow jog, rather than, and maybe at times a walk if there's hills and things like that, rather than trying to go a little bit different and guess it a bit and just go, oh, well, because it's not equal intensity. Zone, like 155 beats running is not the same as 155 beats cycling. They're two different things, because we're going to see everything is shifted up on the run because there's more body movement, there's impact, not as much ventilation especially, so heart rate's usually a bit higher to compensate that oxygen supply mechanism. So yeah, really interesting one on that side of things. Like I said, you got to tick as many boxes as you can, but trying to avoid the hottest part of the day is going to keep it down as low as possible. There's not much more you can do beyond that, really, other than just missing the session if it is excessively hot. Which, if your only time to run is 3 p.m. in the afternoon and it's going to be 40 plus degrees, well, I probably wouldn't be going out and running. It's just not a great thing to do, because you put yourself in all sorts of issues in terms of potential heat stroke and things like that. You'd be better off maybe missing the session or subbing it out, doing it on a different day, filling it in later, that type of thing. So yeah, hopefully I answered your question there. I seen you just mentioned a good point on the difference between heart rate zones. Yeah, you got to make sure you remember that what we're doing on the bike isn't equivalent to what we're doing on the run. So when heat plays a factor, it's not like I said, it's not like you're riding along at the intensity of a zone 2 at 140 beats per minute, but the heat drifted up to 150. And it's like, oh, well, that was our running heart rate. Well, it's like not quite, because we're not quite getting that same stimulus, because it is a different sport and there's different demands. You got to make sure that we are working in the right areas. So trying to keep it down as best you can. Might be frustratingly slow, but that's usually the best way to go. Just sort of follow up to that. Comment in a previous video about hills not being a substitute for high pace got you thinking. Hopefully there might be a follow up to this one. But interesting point on the hills for the VO2 side of things. Really, that video came about because I get asked that question quite a lot. Am I able to go and do VO2 intervals up hills, or athletes commonly go? I talk about I'd recommend doing 2 to 4 minutes on at 95% of your VO2 max with an equal, very easy spinning recovery or equal walking recovery if you're running. And it's the type of thing that they immediately go, oh, well, I could go up and I could do that in the hills, and I could ride up the hill really, really fast and then cruise back down. Or I could do that running in the hills, just do like hill repeats. And I kind of go, not really, because it's the type of thing that, like, you go up a hill and it changes the type of resistance we get. So really what we're looking for in terms of that stimulus is more, particularly running wise, I look at it and go, if we're trying to hit the equivalent of, say, 95% of your VO2 max is 350 pace, 3 minute 50 pace, because your VO2 max is 345. We're trying to teach the body to run that fast. We're not just trying to get the heart rate up there. Heart rate will do whatever you want. And that's the thing that a lot of athletes don't understand, is they're like, oh, well, my heart rate's really high, so it must mean I'm working hard. It's like, no, I can just make you really fatigued and have short recovery and your heart rate will go through the roof. I can get you to run, like we're just talking about, in a heat wave, and I can get your heart rate to go through the roof. I can make your heart rate do whatever I want it to, because that'll just be the body's response to getting oxygen to the system. It's not what's actually happening at the muscle to process that oxygen and actually use it a lot more effectively. So that is something we have to consider, whereas up a hill, yeah, you'll be working really hard, but particularly cycling wise, you're not going to be at 95% of your VO2 max. Apologies as well, I'll plug in this little battery for my camera here, but you're not going to be working at 95% of VO2 max. You're potentially working at 130% of VO2 max, because it's easy to get the wattage up a hill. We all know that. Running wise, you're not going to be running at 350 up a hill because you'll burn yourself out, because 350 up a hill is significantly harder than 350 on the flat. So you're going to be running at lower speed, but that's not enough to generate that same process through the muscle, which is what we're looking for. We're trying to stress that last part of the equation, how our oxygen can get into the working muscle and actually be used to process or break down fuel to create energy. So that's where making sure we've got the intensity right. And it kind of comes back, and I've just seen your comment there about it sort of prompted your question. Yeah, so it really then comes back to when we're looking at heart rates, making sure you're getting that genuine stimulus. You can go and use heart rate through the hills, and instead of having a heat wave, let's talk about a normal condition. You go and do your zone 2 run up through the hills. Well, you wouldn't necessarily think to do a zone 2 ride as opposed to a zone 2 run, because every time you go zone 2 running and you're in the hills, your heart rate goes really high. So you go, oh, I'll do a ride instead to keep heart rate down. You'd be like, well, I just run slower, wouldn't I? So that's the same type of thing. It's a similar. It's just substituting what that added resistance or that added factor is. But it's the type of thing that we need to make sure that we're getting the stimulus that's specific to the sport that we're trying to do. Is going to be the best way to improve. We've talked previously about crossover of your bike can cross over a bit to your running, but it's not necessarily equivalent because we're not getting that specificity aspect. We're not getting that direct translation. It's general qualities, not specific qualities. Something to keep in mind anyway. But yeah, great talking point. Really interesting discussion that you've brought up there, and good to see it's been prompted off the back of a previous video. So thanks for watching that one and taking something out of it and going away thinking about a different problem or a different question and bringing it back to the group. Really sort of useful for everyone who's jumping in here to sort of get their head around, because I know particularly Southern Hemisphere, as we get into warmer conditions, more conversations around the heat are definitely going to be an interesting discussion. I'm sure we'll come back to it later on down the track with some of our viewers and subscribers who are from overseas, Northern Hemisphere, who will eventually roll back around in the summer, early next year. It's the type of thing that we'll sort of probably revisit that conversation constantly, because it is a big one that gets a lot of athletes. Do the bulk of a lot of our training in the winter to prepare for summer events. As soon as the heat kicks in, it can be a difficult one to make sure we're still getting the right stimulus that we need. Moving through, Jacob, your question here: are you doing online coaching? Interesting question. I've had a few questions about this. It's something that I don't necessarily do much of at the moment, mainly because we've got I've got enough commitments in terms of the testing side of things in the lab and getting through athletes there. But then also my masters, and then also what I'm training for in terms of umpiring football. I just don't necessarily have massive amounts of time. So I do coach three athletes effectively at the moment. And I don't really plan on taking too many more. And majorly, the reason being I just don't have the time to be able to have the quality up there. And I'd much rather coach a really small number of athletes specifically. I have done training programs, and I do training programs through work. But again, something that we're moving away from just purely because I don't have enough time in the week to be able to get to everyone with the quality that I would like to get to anymore, which is a good problem to have, that we are so busy, but it's something that I don't necessarily do at the moment. I don't necessarily offer and publicly advertise at the moment. It's more of a follow-up to people being able to come into lab and do the testing as a side product if it works for that athlete and we sort of get along really well. And the guys that I'm coaching, really, I've coached one of them now for the better part of 2 and a bit years, and the other one of the others who just joined back with me recently, took a break for about 18 months, but I coached him for the better part of 18 months to 2 years before that. So longer, I coached them a while ago, and they're coming back, which is really good. And I'm quite sort of selective about not necessarily coaching pros or anything like that, and only coaching high end. These guys are top end age groupers and pretty sort of solid athletes, but it's the type of thing that I just try and keep that small because it's not the major bulk of my work, but also I just don't have the time of the week at the moment with my degree and all that going on to be able to take on too many more athletes. So maybe something in the future we look at some ways that we can incorporate maybe some coaching or training programs or some additional stuff into the Team NJ sports science type stuff and the YouTube membership. But it's the type of thing. For now, it's something that I'm not able to do. I would thinking down the track. I also have to consider, well, what are my priorities in terms of my I guess formal training qualifications. My interests more lie in the sports science and high performance management side of things rather than direct coaching. I think there's a place for coaching. I do enjoy it, and it's fun when I'm working with athletes that I get along well with, and we sort of have a good relationship. But in terms of the stuff that I love the most is problem solving athlete performance rather than just writing in a program each week. I think that's kind of the easy part. It's the part where it's, well, what didn't work in this preparation and how can we improve that for next time? Or what are we seeing in the data to be able to take away from that to implement into the training is the part that I enjoy more so. What are we seeing in the data from training sessions? More of an analysis and high performance manager role, which, I mean, my ideal thinking about long term is potentially having some people who can do the programming side of things for me and being able to oversee the program rather than necessarily being the one who's writing it directly. So something to think about. If people are interested, let me know if that's something you'd be interested in, maybe as part of the YouTube channel membership, if it's something that you'd be willing to join up to as a part of that, as a perk of that. It would obviously have to be limited, but if it grows big enough and the channel continues to grow and people are interested in that type of thing, absolutely happy to work out some logistics. I do know some people in the industry who, from my end, from a sports science and training perspective, who definitely be interested in a little bit of work. So if I could help to boost them up and give them a little bit of work as well, maybe we can work something out. So hopefully that a long way to answer a pretty sort of simple question there, but at the moment, not doing anything on online coaching just yet. It's more guys based in Melbourne, but I'm not ruling it out off the table by any means. It does really depend on my circumstances going sort of down the track and sort of how things pan out. Have to get through my masters first. Football is obviously a big priority for me in terms of umpiring, so making sure that those things sort of tick the boxes, and then everything after that we can sort of work it out as we get a bit more time to be able to get down there. But already I can see a few of you saying, yeah, you'd be interested in that sort of thing. So might be something that we look at down the track. We'll see how we go. Let's keep growing this channel first, keep growing the community. Because the more people who might be interested in it, it makes it obviously easier for me to be like, okay, let's go and do this. Let's sort of pull the trigger on it and set something up or start something up that we can make work. Because obviously it would take a bit from my end to get all the admin and stuff right. Obviously we've got people in different time zones, so making sure I've got people who are able to sort of uphold the standards of what we work for on this channel, and also make sure things are ticking off in the right direction. But would be something I'm going to write down and keep in the back of my mind for in the future. So keep an eye out for maybe something in that space. We'll have a think about it. Coming into our next question here, Nick sending it in. Thank you. For a 5K race, should I be in zone 5 from start to finish? Might have to help me out a little bit here in terms of what your definition of zone 5 is, because if I look at the definition that I use, top of zone 4 leading into zone 5 would be where your VO2 max is. So you would not be able to sit in zone 5 from start to finish. If you're talking about like a 7 zone system where zone 5 is like a super threshold, that would probably be more realistic. I typically see athletes be able to sit just above threshold. Makes sense. If you're racing for about 20 minutes, just less than 20 minutes, if you're a reasonable amateur athlete, obviously down the sort of 12-13 minute mark if you're a pro. If you're sort of racing, obviously if you're 30 minutes above, it starts to get close to threshold, because threshold's that genuine 45 to an hour, thinking about it. So typically it's just above threshold, but it's the type of thing that from a zone perspective, for me to really answer your question, I need to know what zones you're working off. If you're using, like I said, if you're using a 7 zone system where zone 5 is more of like a threshold or super threshold, absolutely. Pacing strategy then comes into it. If we're looking at what makes up a good 5K race, there's different ways that you could do it. You could start out really hard and fade towards the end. You could start out pretty comfortable and build towards the end. Those two would likely come out as very similar race results, depending on how much you bombed after sort of like maybe 3 and a bit K. But it's the type of thing that if you held the same pace, you might end up coming out with the same result as well. Really just depends on the strategy, type of course, people running around you. I mean, a perfect race isn't necessarily you sit on one pace the entire time. I would almost argue the perfect race is you start to actually build a little bit towards the end. You pick up a bit of speed. So maybe it's a case you start in more of a low zone 5, then you work up to a high zone 5, if that makes sense. Or you work from a low zone 4, you work up into it. You start at threshold and you start to get a bit faster. If you're more an athlete who likes to go and sit on a consistent pace, that'd be perfect. It's always the type of thing that you could go on and on about all the different tactics in terms of pacing. But like I said, really for a 5K time trial, I always look at it as sort of usually about half a step up from where if I'm thinking in testing terms, 1K an hour increments on the treadmill. When I do a lab test, it's always about half a kilometer an hour faster than what your threshold comes out to be. So it usually is that sort of just over threshold, 105% of threshold, usually where that 5K can sit. You're pretty cooked at the end of it, obviously, but that's usually where we start to estimate that 5K sitting at for most athletes. So if your zone 5 sits just above threshold, then that's perfect. Yeah, definitely be sitting in that for as much of it as possible, because you should, in theory, as long as you've trained it, should be able to sit there pretty comfortably. but it all comes down to definition of zones. And that's something I had an interesting discussion the other week with another sports scientist, another practitioner, another coach on Instagram about he made a post about zones, and like he was just using a 3-zone system, and he made I read the comment on it about how like zone 2 is not as effective as zone 3, and so I sent him a message just like what that kind of is an interesting point. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, but like we're kind of like we're clearly not on the same page here in terms of what's going on. We cleared it up, and he was just using a 3-zone system. So his zone 3 was actually talking about my zone 4, and his zone 2 was actually talking about my zone 3. So we were both talking in the same terms of probably not best to do all your running at sort of tempo. We want to do it either a little bit longer and slower and a little bit higher. We're talking the same approach, but he was using a 3-zone system rather than a 5-zone system. And it was just that disconnect that we hadn't worked out initially that made it hard for us to understand where we're coming from. So if we are going to get zone questions in, I enjoy them. Great, keep them coming. But make sure we just sort of give a bit of context. What type of system you're using. If you're talking about should I be in zone 5, then let me know you're using a 7-zone system, or what does zone 5 mean? So then I can help guide you a little bit better. That's going to help me make a better decision for you, and also help sort of answer the question a little bit clearer for others as well. Because there's so many different ways you can do things. There's so many different little, I guess, tweaks to the rules or the terminology in the industry. It's very hard to get that consistency. So then if I interpret it in one way and I've misinterpreted it, then it can just be more confusing, and then we get in all sorts for everyone. So trying to keep everything as consistent for everyone, and so everyone can understand where we're coming from. Context is super critical and super important. But great question though. Yeah, 5K should be just above threshold. Is the ideal. All right, moving into next question here. Why are the Norwegians and cross-country skiers overrepresented in the top list of VO2 max scores? Is it because they do more testing or inaccurate tests? This is a great question, because it's not necessarily to do with they do more VO2 max tests, or they've just got inaccurate data. Some tests, like there was an 18-year-old cyclist I know from years ago that got tested, and he was up at he tipped it the highest VO2 max of, like it was like something silly in the 90s, like 97 or 98 or something like that as a relative VO2 max. It was an 18-year-old. They since worked out it was a pretty dodgy test, and it wasn't great. So it's the type of thing. Sometimes those top VO2 max lists are sometimes inaccurate. Yes, you can have that happen, but predominantly in terms of cross-country skiers, we see them up at the highest because the real reason is, one, they've got the aerobic capacity and aerobic power. They are fundamentally incredible endurance athletes. They're basically cross-country runners, but it's harder because on the snow it's a greater resistance. So we're actually looking at people who are highly aerobically trained to start with. So they're going to have high VO2 maxes. You know what else happens? When we do a VO2 max test, it's always at sea level. When a cross-country skier trains, where do they train? They train in the mountains because they have to. They're on snow. So they're up at altitude all the time. So they get that. They're basically getting this chronic adaptation to altitude, or they're born up at altitude. They've got that chronic adaptation there. They've got an incredible amount of EPO naturally occurring. So what we're getting is that stimulus of red blood cell improvement. We come back down to sea level. We've got more hemoglobin, more red blood cells. We can transport more oxygen. So that means that incredible aerobic development they've got everywhere else is just multiplied at sea level. So we get these really high readings in terms of VO2 max. We have a look at the body movement as well. Compared to running, for example, and compared to cycling, they've got the most body movement. Arms are doing a lot of work. So a lot of the muscle mass here is actually using oxygen. A lot of the muscle mass in the legs is using oxygen as well. It's not as impactful. So it's not like running where you're getting that jamming up of the diaphragm and shortening things up to shorten the breath. It's a little bit smoother technique. They're almost skating at times. So that also helps them to get that bigger ventilation in. All of these factors are contributing. Particularly though, like I said, that it's that altitude factor of training up at altitude all the time, chronic adaptation. We come back down and do our test at sea level. We've got all this excess available oxygen. Numbers go through the roof quite quickly. So not uncommon at all to see cross-country skiers, particularly the Norwegians. I mean, they're really good at cross-country skiing. That's why they're sort of, I guess, national sports. You like, you always see them do well at the Olympics, but all the Scandinavian countries or any of the top cross-country skiing countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland's always up there. All those types of countries usually have really high VO2 max recordings, but then also the sport itself, just the nature of the sport allows them to get those really high VO2 max readings because they're also quite big athletes. You go look at cross country skier, they're usually quite tall as well, good leverage, but then also they're pretty lean. I mean, there's not much of them. So in terms of relative numbers, they've got the tall genetics to have a really big engine, but then they've got low muscle mass, or like low body mass, should I say, not muscle mass. They've got high muscle mass, but low body mass or weight. So when we do that relative division, they might have a pretty good absolute, but their relative is through the roof. Their power to weight ratio is through the roof because they're not very big for their size, but they might be sort of 180 centimeters, but only like 70 kilos, for example. Really incredible makeup in general of their physiology that allows them to get so high. And I guess a follow up there. Good article on the guy that measures 97 in VO2 max from Outside Magazine. Go check that one out. I haven't read that in particular, but I know some of the readings in terms of those guys at 96, 97. It's, like I said, it's always interesting to look at because that's kind of the benchmark where we're at. How high can we push that VO2 max, given everything being in the perfect scenario, if you like, the altitude aspect, the body movement aspect, the endurance training thrown in there as well. All of that can then lead to some of these incredible numbers. So they're always interesting to look at. So yeah, if you can go find that article from Outside Magazine, go check that one out. I might go look it up in maybe once we're done here or later in the week over the weekend and go have a read. But some of those incredible VO2 maxes are just ridiculous. I'll be interested to see if anyone gets over 100 sometime. I haven't seen anyone crack 100. That would be insane. I don't know. Like, it'd be hard to validate if it actually was 100 because I don't think anyone would be able to get there. It's a lot. I don't think we're maybe too far off, but at some point someone might. But it'd be kind of cool to then see if someone could break that 100 mark in terms of VO2 max as a relative number. 100 mils per kilo per minute would be just bananas. 97 is already incredible, and even in the 80s or the 70s, whenever I see that in the lab, I'm still like, yeah, that's a pretty awesome number. Up and getting three figures would just be ridiculous. It would just be ridiculous. I don't even know. Yeah, I don't even know if they would look at it and probably be like, nah, that can't be right, and then they'd probably have to test again to validate it. But and you'd want to be pretty skeptical of what testing equipment they used, but it'd be interesting to see if one day they could get there. But yeah, great point, and interesting question around cross-country skiers, particularly the Norwegians, but cross-country skiing as a whole as to why they dominate the top list. They dominate over cycle. Like if you look at the top 10, it's 8 cross-country skiers, a cyclist and a runner usually. that's what's there. Follow-up question on the back of talking about highest VO2 maxes. What's the highest I've measured in the lab? Highest I've seen in terms of relative, I believe it was 84 was the highest I've seen. That was actually an interesting case where we had a young developing rower. He's about 18 years of age. He was a rower, pretty gun rower, but he was also, because he was still developing, he was quite light as well. So we ended up having a really high absolute because he had a massive lung capacity, and you could just tell genetically he was going to grow quite tall in the next couple of years. He was going to hit that massive growth spurt. It's the type of thing that he had a really massive absolute VO2 max, massive ventilation, but he just didn't weigh much yet because he was so young. So that pushed his relative through the roof. The highest absolute number I've seen, though, so the difference between relative and absolute before I get into it is absolute is just the max amount of oxygen you can take and transport, utilize in either liters per minute or milliliters per minute of oxygen. We take that number divided by your body weight in kilograms, gives us our relative number. So when we talk about 84 or we talk about 97 or we talk about 60, it's mils per kilo per minute. It's a power to weight ratio. It's like watts per kilo on the bike, for example. So the highest relative I've seen is about 84. The highest absolute I've seen is about 6,500. Had a really big, tall ex-rower. Again, rowers sort of do well in the absolute category. This guy was quite big though, so his relative was brought down a bit. I think his relative in the end was only sort of, when I say only, 70 odd, because he was about 100 and whatever it worked out to be. I can do the maths. I think he was like, he might have been like 90 something kilos. Yeah, he would have been about 90 kilos, 95 kilos, ex-rower. He's now a cyclist. Put out something silly like 500 watts, it was 500 and what would it have been? 420, 450, 480, 520, no, 510, 510 watts, I think at the end of the test is what we had, but 6,500 milliliters of oxygen per minute, so 6.5 liters of oxygen per minute being used. That's the highest absolute. As I said, the highest relative is 84. In terms of output, that guy takes a cake in terms of the 6,500 absolute being the highest oxygen consumption total, regardless of body weight. But then also the highest wattage I've seen on the bike, I believe, is at 510. I have a few people get into the mid to high 400s, but not too many get past that 500 mark. Given that most of the people I test are also sort of amateur athletes as well, rather than necessarily the pros. The pros don't normally, we don't see them too often, particularly at the moment because of COVID. But then in terms of like highest speed I've seen, so highest wattage about that 510 mark, mid 500s at the end of the test. Highest speed I've seen in terms of running on the treadmill was our treadmill in the lab only goes to 20k an hour, so 3-minute k pace. Beyond that, it goes up a gradient. So we go up 2% every 3 minutes after that, or every stage after that. I think the highest we got to was 20 k's an hour at 8% gradient. So three minutes per k, exactly 3 minutes per k at 8% uphill was the fastest we've seen on the treadmill, which I think it roughly would equate to something like 240 odd pace, maybe 235, something incredibly quick. We've had some ridiculous runners come in. I've had a 2-time Olympian 10,000 meter runner come in. I've had a borderline Commonwealth Games 1,500 meter runner come in, and he got very, very close to that treadmill record and held the original treadmill record of, I think, 6% gradient. 6% gradient. Then we had a marathon runner come in and sort of smash it, and he's a 2 hour 10, 2 hour 8 marathon. Pretty fast. He's racing sort of elite. He's not a Kipchoge fast and running sub 2, but he's pretty sort of handy athlete. So it was the type of thing he was doing. His recovery at 4:30 pace or even faster, 4:20 pace. His recovery at the end of the test, which most of us would be running tempo at that point. So pretty ridiculous. So there's some of the highest numbers I've seen, but it's always fun when those get broken though. It's always interesting to see an athlete come in and absolutely monster it. And see those numbers those VO2 numbers or the brake treadmill records or brake power records in terms of wattage. All that stuff is always fun, but doesn't happen a lot. It takes a pretty sort of incredible athlete, particularly an amateur athlete, to break some of those records. But when our pros come through, they quite often smash a lot of our benchmarks that we do see. I've just seen from a little while ago now, because we got a bit sidetracked with a couple of questions there, but a couple of you sort of talking about a bit of merch. So it might be a bit early in the life of the channel, but would you consider NJ Sports kits, cycling jersey, tri-suits, running t-shirts, caps would be a cool way to support the channel? I have considered it. I'm trying to work out, and something as we grow the channel bigger and bigger and bigger, and more members on the channel, it's something I am looking at, a way that we can do it so it's basically direct to you guys, and try and keep it as cost effective as we can. So I don't actually have to order a whole bunch of stuff and it's kind of just sitting there. What it means is we can change up the styles and that every so often and make it a little bit more interesting rather than sort of making a design now and in 12 months time we can't actually make a new one. So I'm looking at ways we can maybe do that and incorporate that into the membership and have a bit of a discount for our channel members, but then for everyone to be able to access it and gain access to it. If you do want to sort of rep it, I also have to come up with a bit of a logo as well. Not actually my strong point. So if anyone is interested in designing a logo for me and for the channel and the team, be good. But yeah, it's definitely something I've looked at, and it'd be a fun thing to do. And also if you like sort of mentioned there, another way to support the channel if you're interested in doing it. Definitely something I can think about and put it on the list, similar to the coaching question we had before. Put it on the list of maybe things to consider over the next little while as we continue to grow. But the major thing I'm looking at the moment is we're very close. We're about 40 subscribers, not even 30 something subscribers away, 36 I think, from hitting 2,500, which would be really, really cool if we could hit that by the end of the month. So if everyone going to head over the channel, share the link, send it on to one person, even everyone watching tonight, if you pass it on to one person, then we're sort of, there's another 20 or so people, or 10 or so people sharing it to 1 or 2 people each. There's 20 or so people that we've got to support the channel as well. Get them, go click subscribe. It doesn't cost them anything to subscribe to the channel. It's free. All you need is a Google account, which most people have. Most people have a Gmail. So if they're not sure how YouTube works, I know some people just watch YouTube videos, but they don't understand there's a subscribe feature. And there's a way you can sort of keep up to date with the channels that you like and the videos that you like watching regularly. Join up to YouTube or it's your Google account, or join up to Google, your Gmail account, whatever it is, connect everything up, sign in, allows you to hit that subscribe. So every time you open YouTube, you actually get notified of videos. You get suggested videos on my content, but they're also similar channels to what I produce as well. It sort of works out nicely, so you you follow the things that you're interested in a little bit more so. But yeah, definitely want to get to that 2,500 before the end of the year. And we're getting very close to 1,000 on Instagram as well. So I might plug that as well at NJ_sportscience. Head over to Instagram, give a follow over there. If you're not on Instagram, jump over, create an account. Again, it's free, doesn't cost anything. Head over, chuck a follow. It's also easy to get in contact with me directly and send me a direct message if you have some more specific questions that maybe you don't want to share in the group, or you just can't make a live stream and you want to get the question through anyway. Send it over on Instagram. It's the easiest way. They'll get the notification straight away. I can have a look at the question, send back a written reply, but then also turn it into a video, bring it up on the live stream, whatever it might be. So if anyone has any further questions, I know we've been on for about 45 minutes now or so, but if we have some other questions, feel free to chuck them in the chat. Happy to answer them before we do maybe wrap things up. If there aren't any questions, happy to sort of start to wrap things up, because we have been on for a while. Had some great discussion already tonight, so great questions for those of you who have sent them in. And again, thanks to our channel members. You can see them there in the chat with the badges next to their name for continuing to support the channel. I'll give you guys a shout out every possible opportunity, because I do appreciate your support, extra support above and beyond subscribing and joining us on these lives and throughout the videos and the comments, but supporting the channel above and beyond that. Like I said before, working on it, some ways that we can build some more perks into that membership to not only get a few more people in, but also give back to you, because you've helped sort of grow this channel and support it as well. Coming into a couple of funny questions here. Odds after the video, Will, yes. It's a bit of an in-joke. Play a bit of PS4. We might jump on and play a bit afterwards. So just a bit of a way to relax at the end of the day is something I always enjoy doing. So I'll say yes to him. We know what we're talking about there. It's a bit of an in-joke, but yes is the answer. Jacob here though, what is your 5K PR? Good question, because I don't think I've run one fresh. I think the only time really I've actually run a 5K would be in a triathlon. I don't think I've ever run one like a park run, or where I've just gone out for the purpose of running a 5K. It's the same with the 10K. I actually posted on Instagram probably a month or two ago that I broke my 10K PB, and my watch actually, my Garmin told me, it was like, oh, new personal record. I was like, oh, what's this about? And said new fastest 10K, and it was like mid 40 minutes. Like, it wasn't anything flash. And I was just going out for like a pretty sort of topper zone 2, little bit of tempo mixed in there type run, and happened to cover the 10K sort of pretwe well, a lot better than obviously I had before, because I don't typically run sort of that distance. The type of stuff I train for in terms of footy is a lot shorter, sharper. We're only on for 20 to 25 minutes in a quarter. We get a break. I'm not on for the entire time. I'm walking part of that because I'm not directly involved in the play. So all of that type of stuff, I don't necessarily have to run consistent efforts. I can tell you what my 2K PR is. My 2K PR was 6:28, I think, was my best 2K time trial that I've ever done, 6:28. That was a couple of years ago. Again, I haven't really done too well over the last couple of years, because I've had some, when I've been in a state and a part of the year where doing something like a 2K is appropriate, sort of pre-season, had a couple of hiccups in the last couple of years, so I haven't been able to do that. You've just seen the comment there, talking about lol, mid 40, not anything flash, and Aaron's just saying he'd love to be that fast. I say that, and I say it sort of jokingly, mainly because I wasn't going out deliberately to try to do a fast 10K. I was just going out as part of my run, and it just happened to be the fastest I've done, because I don't actually train for that. It just happened as a result of a training run. In terms of 5K, I've done sort of pretty close to 20 and like 19-ish minutes in triathlons before, in sprint distance tries. That's sort of just on that 19-20 minute sort of mark off the bike. That's probably the fastest I've done there. I don't think I've done... Let's have a look at Garmin Connect. I'll have a look at my records and see what it just says on my in here as what my, I guess, bests are, because I honestly wouldn't really know. Let's have a look. Where would I find it? Maybe people can let me know. How am I able to see it? Here we go. View personal records. 5K. So apparently on Garmin, my 5K says my best is 20 minutes and 37 seconds, but I've definitely gone faster in a triathlon, and it's not probably going to pick it up on the run side of things, because I probably hit my watch at the wrong time. not as fast as you. I hear you. I've had 5K and 10K PBs on training runs. Aaron saying here as well. Yeah, it's not something, because I don't train for it and I don't compete over those distance or anything like that. I don't necessarily, when I say I don't necessarily care, I'm interested into what I can do, but it's not something I go out and try and run really well. My 10K, 47:12 is my 10K. According to this, my half marathon was at the end of a 70.3, which actually happened to be my longest run. It's the one and only time I've ever run a half marathon. It was the end of 70.3, and I bombed big time, 152. Not a great run at all. Some of you might think that is probably handy time, but for me, I was pretty disappointed in that because I was on track for like a 140 in the first 10K, and then just blew up big time in the sort of middle five. But yeah, my longest run ever is only 21.3K, which was that 70.3. So I don't really necessarily do the volume as much. Just having a look through some of the other, just while I'm here, some of the other stuff that's come up. What do we got? Longest ride, never ticked over 100Ks apparently. 98.7 kilometers, which I'm a bit bummed about. Max 20-minute power, which effectively is my best ever FTP effort, kind of, sort of 220. That's okay. That's not too bad. My best 40K ride. I don't know why it does a 40K ride. That's a really weird sort of length. You would have thought it was maybe 50 or things like that. Best 40K ride at 49 minutes. I'm not a great cyclist, and that was probably the 70.3 as well. It was probably the partway through. But it's the type of thing that, I mean, I don't tend to look at that type of stuff because it's just not applicable to me or specific. But they're sort of my times. Leave your times in the chat. Let's see, what do we got? Who's the fastest 5K runner that we've got here? I have trained guys who are a lot faster than me though, and I sort of pride myself on their results. Just sort of thinking back and going through some old data the other day. Trained a guy who won the mile at Stall last year, the handicap mile. So some pretty fast guys there. I'm working with a guy at the moment. We're trying to crack 16 minutes for a 5K. That's his latest goal. So I'm in a similar boat to what we've just had a discussion there. When I say I've done something not flash and someone else thinks it's kind of fast, the guys that I coach and I train and I do some sports science consulting for, some of those guys are incredible. They're ridiculously fast, and they put some of my times, make my times look silly, and they're doing my times as their like zone 2 run. They're going out running sort of 30-minute or sub 30. One of the guys I did testing for, the 2-time Olympian, runs a sub 30 10K. It was like a 27-minute was his best 10K, which, yeah, I don't really have too many more words than that, because it was ridiculous, his pace. Unbelievable athlete. Don't know if there's time for another one. There definitely is. All right, I might actually keep this one to our last one because we're getting close to the hour and this will sort of tick us over. But appreciate you sending in the question in here that we can get through at the end. Since you do a lot of VO2 testing, how do you find the Garmin or other metrics compared to the machine numbers? Great question. I have talked about this on the channel before, so if you haven't seen it, it is, I guess, one of them, or it is the most popular video on the channel, and what helped kind of grow the channel initially in the first place and get us kickstarted was me talking about the Garmin metric on your watch and how it's calculated. Basically, in terms of how it is calculated, and I might try and quickly find for you some data that I can show you where have I got some? What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up some data to show you the graph basically that we're looking at. So I'm going to just put this up on my screen. Just bear with me for a sec because I'm going to take out some of the names from this data because I don't want to reveal whose data it is. But what I want to show you is the relationship between heart rate and VO2 max. It's basically a linear correlation. So what we mean by that is it's pretty close. So as heart rate increases, VO2 is also going to increase. They're proportional, or and work in a linear fashion. So what we end up with is Garmin's able to estimate VO2 max reasonably well as long as your heart rate numbers are accurate and your pacing numbers are accurate. What I tend to find with Garmin as well is if you do a lot more in and around threshold, you get rewarded. If you do things up near VO2 max, you don't get rewarded. If you do a lot of long slow, you don't necessarily get rewarded either. So you have to basically do a lot of threshold running, which kind of isn't the best way to think about it, but it just looks at it as fitness. In terms of how do they stack up to machine numbers, if all of those things are correct and accurate, so things like your heart rate is correct, things like your sorry, I'm just going through and just trying to make sure that this all is anonymous. If your heart rate, your pace, all of those things are accurate, you actually end up with a pretty reasonable look at what your VO2 max actually is. Most of the time, it's between sort of anything between 2 to 3 mils per kilo per minute out, which is a pretty good. That's pretty good. Like, you're not going to get too much better than that. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly put this up. So this graph here really explains the majority of the Garmin equation. So what we're looking at on this graph is oxygen consumption, so VO2 as a relative number, milliliters of oxygen per minute on the y-axis, heart rate on the x-axis, and you can see it's plotted against each other, so that blue line, and I've just put a line of best fit in there and the equation too. So whenever we're looking at maybe estimating something that we don't necessarily find in the test, so if I'm looking at where active recovery occurs, so 56% of VO2 max, typically we always start maybe a little bit above that. So in terms of understanding that, I go through and check the correlation and have a look at what's going on. But this R squared value is really the key. R squared is basically how strong is the relationship between the variable on the y-axis and the variable on the x-axis. And what we've got here is 0.96, which would indicate extremely strong. If this number was 1.0, you would not see this blue line at all because it's completely hidden by the black. That would be a perfect relationship of there's a perfect increase in heart rate for every increase in oxygen consumption, or every increase in oxygen consumption, there's the exact increase in heart rate. We're not obviously going to get that because heart rate's a little bit more dynamic than that, but the closer we can get to 1.0, the better. Usually we see it at 0.96, 0.97, 0.95. The relationship is very close. How does Garmin then get a really close reading is basically they plot a graph similar to this. They have an estimate of what your oxygen consumption might look like based on their collection of data in terms of athletes' paces, athletes' heart rates, their age, their weight, all of those factors. They bring it all together into an equation to basically create this outlook to then go, all right, your heart rate at your maximum intensity efforts gets to here. That would put you at an approximate VO2 max of whatever it might be. That's pretty much what we're looking at, and that's why a device like your watch can get a VO2 reading. A lot of the time it is quite inaccurate, and a lot of the time it is frustrating. Like, I've noticed at the moment that my VO2 max hasn't gone up in a long time. It says I'm about 58, which I know I'm probably just over 60. Usually when I test in the lab, it's the type of thing that looking at something like that, I've seen it increase in the last week or so by shifting more to those threshold-based intervals, short recovery. That type of thing is starting to see it increase a bit, which is just an interesting factor because the zones are kind of out. Like, I'm going and doing a lot of my stuff is more that aerobic power up at VO2 max and above. And the stuff that we do for footy, like we'll do 30 second on, or we'll do 15 second on, 15 second off at 120% of VO2 max, not 120% of threshold, 120% of VO2 max. So what that means is that I'm going way above what it just thinks I'm doing anaerobic work all the time, and it just doesn't think that that's a good thing to do for aerobic fitness. I am improving my aerobic fitness, and I know that because I'm getting better at these efforts, but it's the type of thing that Garmin doesn't necessarily recognize it because it's more of that traditional method of having a look at what's going to get you that traditionally aerobically fit and VO2 going up. So it does a fairly good job. Does it incorporate hills and elevation, which I've just seen is that the sort of follow-up to that question? I don't, from what I understand, I don't think it would, because most of the time when I see low VO2 maxes, I ask the athlete what they're doing a lot of, and they say they're running a lot of hills or they're a trail runner. It's not factored in because it's only going to look at the relationship between heart rate and pace. And Aaron's just said there, my VO2 max drops when I do trail runs, and that's typically because your pace is down for the same or higher heart rate, isn't it? That's the same when you're in hot conditions, so you see it drop down as a result, because all it's comparing is having a look at how fast are you moving in relation to what your physiological response is, to then be able to map that out and give us that graph that I showed you before. That's all that's really happening, basically. I mean, I know the formula is going to be a lot more complex than that, and I don't have inside information on exactly what the formula and exactly what the predictive equation is from Garmin's end and First Beat and all that. But it's the type of thing that physiologically that makes the most sense, because that's the only really way you would be able to understand what a VO2 max is without directly measuring it, is understand what the heart rate response is in relation to pace, plot that against a whole bunch of information that you have against populations of similar people. Bang, you end up pretty close. And again, it's an estimate. I mean, it's never going to be bang on, and if it is, it's pure fluke that it's a bang on, because it's guessing to an extent. But like I said, your data makes your data accuracy in the collecting during the session makes a big impact. If you're going up hills, it just thinks you're going slow for a high heart rate. So that's also where it's at. I typically find that my VO2 max sits a little bit lower than what it is in the lab. Why? Because I have a high heart rate compared to others. So I'll go and run at 160 beats per minute, 165 beats per minute in a zone 2 and be very, very comfortable. Some people would be like, that's insane. That's my threshold heart rate. It's just kind of the way it is for me. I can hold a high heart rate for a long period of time. Other athletes who overestimates their VO2 max for, if they come into lab, their VO2 is actually lower. It's because they've got a really low heart rate typically. So again, compared to the normal, it's the type of thing that you're going to overestimate because you're lower than the normal average heart rate, or if you're going to underestimate because you're higher than the average heart rate, if that makes sense. That's where a lot of the fluctuation is, and based on the testing and what I see, it does a reasonable job, but nothing's going to beat putting a mask on and actually measuring your oxygen consumption, because it's the only way you can know exactly what oxygen you're using is by measuring it at the end of the day. So something to keep in mind there. Follow up here, just maybe some additional information. It tries to account for elevation, but in your experience, if you want better numbers, you'll get them on the flat. Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point to bring up there is having the barometric altimeter, or the ability to look at what altitude you're at and the change in altitude also would be an influencing factor. Not sort of having that ability to generate that information in the first place is obviously not going to be able to be factored into the equation, so you are going to get some inaccuracy. So I always look at it and go, like, the easiest way to do it would be, if you're trying to look at it, is look at it from flat data. And like anything on your watch with those types of things, look at it over time, see it increase over time. If your VO2 max on your watch is saying 57, 58, 59, 60 over a couple of months period, great. Things are going up. In the lab, we'll probably see that same progression, but it might be 60, 61, 62, 63, or it might be 50, 51, 52, 53. Whatever it might be higher or lower in the actual circumstance, but all we're looking at here is tracking a bit of progress. And as long as things are moving in the right direction, you should be going okay. Don't be necessarily disheartened, though, if things are plateauing and not moving, because my VO2 max numbers haven't moved. They're anywhere between 56 and 58 and I've hit 59 once, I think, in the past 12 to 18 months. It's not something that, like, I wouldn't necessarily get caught up on it. It's just another interesting way that Garmin's tried to separate themselves from their competition and provide a different metric, because everyone likes the term VO2 max. So, and it got really popular a few years ago. So it's the type of thing that having it on the watch is something that people want to see, and they just like the idea of knowing, but going and actually testing it's the only way to get dead accurate. But good little discussion at the end there, because I have sort of covered it before, but we haven't brought it up for a little while, because that video was done quite a long time ago. If you go back and watch it, oh man, it's an old video, different room, different house from where we were doing those videos from earlier in the year. That was one of the first couple of videos I did on the channel as well. So it's a very different setup. Didn't have the lighting. It's a bit grainy. The footage isn't great, and I'm probably trying to talk way too fast. Even though I talk reasonably quick anyway, but compared to what I talked now, I definitely know I was talking really fast back then. But yeah, something we have talked about before. I might have to come back and maybe do a reaction video at some point to that, and have a look at some of those old videos, or just revisit them and redo them, update them, make them a little bit more interesting, add in some additional information, those types of things. So type of thing that definitely go check that one out to go through the breakdown, because I go through a little bit more detail on what we did there, but fundamentally it comes down to that graph, or that relationship between heart rate and VO2. Touching on your point here, Aaron, dropped from 55 to 52 after focusing on a half marathon distance. And it's the type of thing, if you're doing a lot more longer, slower, and you're kind of dropping out some of the top intensity as well, you kind of lose out. You got to, the more well-rounded you can have, the higher it's typically going to go. But like I said, I've been seeing personally, the more I've done at my genuine VO2 max, the types of sessions that are actually increasing my VO2 max. And I know that because I'm going from 3-minute efforts doing 2-minute efforts at 320 pace to doing 2.5-minute efforts at 320 pace and doing 3-minute efforts there. As soon as I changed and started doing like 4-minute efforts at 350 with a 2-minute recovery, all of a sudden my VO2 started going up. So it's more of a thresholdy based base metric and based effort. That is seeing my VO2 go up. The long slow is doing nothing because my heart rate's higher than the average. Just one of those things that's is what it is to an extent, I guess. So What I might do is I might wrap it up there because we've been on. I'm just having a look here. We're getting close to 70 minutes now. So another great live stream. Some really good discussion and questions that popped up tonight. So again, appreciate you jumping in and asking those. If you haven't been able to get in, I know that we've got sort of 13 in now. It's sort of grown really quickly in the last sort of 10 minutes or 15 minutes of the live stream here. So apologies if you're jumping in right on the end here. If you do have a question, feel free to send it through either over on Instagram at @NJ_sportscience. You can go send me a direct message there. Leave it in the comments of the video here because I will go back and look at the comments afterwards to see if there are any questions that we weren't able to get to tonight. Or save it up. Next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Melbourne time, we'll be back on again doing another one of these so you can jump in and ask your question there. Before we jump off, really appreciate those of you who are watching the videos. Watched that video about VO2 Max a couple of times, found it really interesting. Great to hear. Appreciate that. Appreciate you all subscribing to the channel, following everything along, jumping on the videos, commenting, sending your questions through. Thanks again to our channel members for jumping in and supporting the channel above and beyond. A couple of things we've got to take away and work with now. Some interesting ideas from you guys in terms of some apparel, some gear, some training stuff. But then also on the side of things of programs or potential coaching. We'll have a look at that down the road in the future, but a few things for me to think about. Otherwise, appreciate, as always, you jumping on. Continue to share the channel. Let's keep growing this community. Let's get this to 2,500 subscribers before the end of the year. We're only, 44 or something away. Not far off at all now. But again, thanks for having a great discussion tonight. Awesome questions, as always. I'm going to leave it there. Appreciate it. We'll see you in the next one next week or in the next video. Got a couple of videos coming out tomorrow and Friday as well, so keep an eye out for those. Otherwise, look forward to it. Replay's going to be up as always, and I'll time code it so you can jump through the questions as usual. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and yeah, we'll see you in the next one.